So we have the ATLATL and the ATLATL dart. When the ATLATL and the dart are combined together, it's a pretty formidable weapon. It's been used for thousands of years. The oldest known ATLATL that's actually been recovered by archaeologists dates to about 17,000, 18,000 years ago. Some folks even believe it dates back to about 40,000 years ago. This is based on skeletal remains that show signs of arthritis from a large amount of throwing, and even some cave paintings depicting ATLATLs. And we know that the Aztecs battled the Spanish with ATLATLs. And in my last video, when I made a full ATLATL from stone tools, and I included one piece to it, folks had a lot of questions about. And that piece is the Fore-Shaft. In today's day and age, a lot of people that throw the ATLATL will have an ATLATL dart with some sort of field tip on it. But if we travel 10,000 years ago, an ATLATL dart will have the very front side of its tip bored out, reinforced with some sort of cordage, natural fiber, sinew, where a Fore-Shaft can be slid in and pressure fit, giving the thrower an option of mixing up its actual projectile point. Change out your Fore-Shaft based on what that target you're going for is. Every Fore-Shaft gives you versatility within the actual ATLATL dart. Now, ancient hunter-gatherers had probably a lot of Fore-Shafts, carried them in a pouch, but it gave them the option to mix up that actual projectile point based on that target. Even today, practicing with ATLATLs, I still have Fore-Shafts that have field tips that I can throw into a target. And it makes sense. If I'm hunting some sort of large game, ancient stag, or even a bison, or even some sort of mammoth, I can mix up this stone point based on that target. But the idea for the Fore-Shaft is for this piece to actually make penetration into that animal and wiggle loose as that animal kicks and starts to run. The dart comes out, hopefully falls on the ground, the Fore-Shaft stays in, and as that animal manipulates its muscles and its bones as it's running, this Fore-Shaft stays inside, slices and dices, and leads to a quicker bleed out. If you're throwing with a Fore-Shaft, you miss, your point breaks, take your Fore-Shaft out, and just put a brand new one in. Think of the Fore-Shaft kind of like 12 gauge shotgun shell. You can have bird shot, you can have buckshot, you can have a slug. You can shoot the same weapon system, shotgun, but throw in a different load based on your intended target. It's the same thing with the ATLATL and Fore-Shaft. Now, the Fore-Shaft material I want to use is something of a hardwood. A lot of these pieces here have been seasoned. Some of them have been drying for quite some time. I typically want my Fore-Shafts to be between 8 to 10 inches of just the shaft, and then that projectile point will add a little bit more. Now, to prepare my Fore-Shaft, I want to make sure it's pipe straight. In the front section, I'm looking to create my groove, and this groove is going to house my actual ATLATL dart point. So whether you're using something like a big piece of obsidian, you want your actual projectile to fit in there relatively snug. More importantly, when we look at it in profile, I don't want there to be a huge bump. This is called the transition from stone to the actual Fore-Shaft itself. You want it to be as flat and as smooth as possible. And once you have the actual projectile point to the Fore-Shaft, you'll bind it with some pine pitch glue or some sinews. But even once you start adding material onto this, that transition needs to be very smooth. The reason why, if I'm throwing, I want to avoid any sort of lips that could get caught on the edge of a rib, get bound up in some sort of external hair, or even catch on a piece of tendon that could throw my Fore-Shaft off, ultimately breaking it or not getting the penetration I would want. On the tail end of our Fore-Shafts, they're going to come to a tapered out point. We want these to fit snugly in the very front of that ATLATL dart that is reinforced. So when we seat these in, you can see that it just kind of gently slides in there, gets a little resistance, and then I should be able to kind of twist and slide it in there where it's not going to come out with any sort of shaking. This is the smartest way to secure your Fore-Shaft to your actual ATLATL dart. I will only bind Fore-Shafts in pine pitch glue or some form of sinew. I prefer to use nothing but pine pitch as it allows for a very smooth transition. All right, got my heat source, my Fore-Shaft. Doing obsidian, or are we doing this chert one? Let's go with the obsidian. And I've got my pine pitch glue. When you're working with the pine pitch and you're dropping this into your Fore-Shaft, it's kind of a slow process. Every time I'm putting glue anywhere on this Fore-Shaft, I'm looking at that transition. I want to fill this entire groove with pine pitch glue. And if it comes out the sides, that's fine. That's still giving me a good connection point. But the goal is to be able to create that kind of universal smoothness from point to glue and hafting to the actual Fore-Shaft. Heat it up. And if your pine pitch glue is done right, this will be all that you need. Gets a little messy, but that's called life. Just filling it up. Right there. And then I want to take my actual projectile point and give it a little bit of heat. So if my pitch glue is starting to kind of dry out a little bit, this heat will allow it to sit in there nice and easy. Perfect. So I've got my little bit of residual glue right here at the base, and I'm going to scrape that, gently move it down. Just going to take that right there. I could use my fingers, but I want it to be as smooth as possible. You don't have to have your foreshafts completely covered in pine pitch glue. Please be thinking about that transition. Pack that, pack that. So right at the edge of my pitch is where my foreshaft kind of ended, right there and right there. You can look and see that transition from the tip sliding all the way up and over onto my foreshaft. Now, since I would use this foreshaft right here, something like a hog, I'm going to reinforce right below where my foreshaft stopped as far as it being cut into the wood, and reinforce it with a couple wraps of cordage, a real thin cordage but strong cordage, to make sure that it's nice and tight, because I want to avoid this wood from splitting. But it's just about creating a little bit of that reassurance, making sure that you know that this thing makes entry into an intended target, it's not going to split and break, and you're going to lose that potential meal. And right there, nice smooth transition. Even where my cordage is, it's not going to interfere with any of the actual penetration of this foreshaft into its intended target. Let's do a fit check. Slide and squeeze. And now I've taken my ATLATL dart, put a nice foreshaft on there, and it's ready to go for some hunting. When you think about ancient hunter-gatherers and their need to be adaptable and have versatility in their kind of weapons, a handful of foreshafts, 2 or 3 ATLATL darts, you've now increased your opportunities to hunt. You've increased your arsenal, if you will. By mixing up the sizes of your foreshaft, you can target different animals. It's smart, it shows adaptability, it's pretty ingenious if you ask me. If you haven't checked out my latest ATLATL video, please do. It is a full ATLATL build with nothing but stone tools, a lot of throws at the very end, where you actually see me connecting a foreshaft with a stone tip throwing into a 3D target. All right, that is how I make a foreshaft. Appreciate you watching.